And the woman would tell her daughter, "This feather may look worthless, but it comes from afar and carries with it all my good intentions."
Hello and welcome to another episode of Hollywood Gold. I'm your host, Daniela Taplin Lundberg, and I'm here with my right-hand person in person, Becca Camerata.
I did not see that coming. That was a great pun. I liked that.
Oh, Bex, how are you?
I'm good.
So happy to have you in New York this week.
Feels very good to be back in New York.
We're getting a lot done.
Yeah.
We're about to interview one of the great producers of our time, and she currently serves as the president of the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, Janet Yang. And Janet was a mentor to me, actually, back in the day. I was an intern for her back in like 1996 on the Columbia lot. And
did you do a lot of coffee runs?
A lot of coffee runs, a lot of dealing with the copy machine, the Xerox machine.
Right.
There was like all sorts of tricks to like unjamming the paper. I got really good at it at a certain point. But Janet was like really such a great producer, and we're going to interview her about The Joy Luck Club, which was a movie that was made in the early 90s. I remember it just so I remember going to the theater to watch it. I remember being so impacted by it. I remember reading the book. And it was an outlier. Like there were no movies about the Asian community at that time, particularly studio films. So she really was able to make it happen. And I'm so excited to hear the tale. Let's get going. Let's go. Janet, I think I have to tell our loyal audience that you were one of the first jobs I had in Hollywood. I interned for you and worshiped you and Lisa Henson.
Aww.
I remember you guys, I don't know if you remember this, but you went and sold a pitch one day. Hard Candy. Do you remember that nail polish company?
I do.
And I remember you guys leaving the office, and then I was doing an errand and you guys were coming out of the head of Columbia's offices, and you had obviously sold it. And you guys were like talking very animatedly. And I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. Like, that's my future.
And of course, the end to that story is that it never got made.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have these highs and the lows.
So today we're going to focus on The Joy Luck Club, which was a film that I went and saw in theaters, impacted me in a way that I can barely explain. I had read the book in high school. And I remember when it was made into a film, it was a really big deal. I would say you're one of the most successful and first producers that was trying to really make films from underserved voices. And you were successful in those endeavors. It's one of the reasons I admire you so much. So I want to talk about the book, how you found it, how you were involved, start from the beginning, your first memories, and we'll just sort of talk through the whole process and how it got made, because it's such a beautiful film that I just recently rewatched, and it really just holds up so beautifully.
Thank you. It is gratifying to be able to talk about a film that was made now 30 years ago and still have it feel relevant. So that's always surprise. As you well know, you go into every venture not having any idea what's going to come out the other end. Not only what the quality of the film is going to be, but how long lasting it is in people's psyches and consciousness, and what other ramifications there are. So sometimes naivete is a good thing. I would say I was very naive, and it really started, my whole journey into the film industry is very unusual, and this was one of the first projects that was introduced to me. So I have to go back a little bit.
Tell me. Yes, I'm interested in it all. Yes.
I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up, and my life changed when there was this sudden possibility. My parents are immigrants from China. They came in the late 40s. They didn't come as immigrants. They came as students. They had every intention of going back. And then regime changed. They were subsidized by the former regime. the nationalist regime, those funds got cut off. So they scrambled. They didn't know what to do. And they decided to stay here. So I grew up knowing very little about my parents' background, anything about China. It was all just kind of a blur, nor did they particularly dwell on it. Everything changed one day in 1972 when the Chinese government decided to open up China to Westerners, especially to Chinese Americans. And I happened to be working on a project that describes why that happened. It's like some very chance encounter. Again, talk about innocence. It was during a ping pong tournament, an international ping pong tournament.
No.
And I swear to God, and they were American and China were mortal enemies at the time. This American player missed the bus to the stadium. So he just is scrambling and he just catches the next one. It happens to be the Chinese bus. And by the end of that trip, they're shaking hands and the Chinese guy's giving him a gift. These photos make it to the press in China and they're like, hey, we're going to invite the American ping pong team to China, which they did. And that led to an invitation for then President Nixon and Henry Kissinger. Just have to give that background because it was also just this complete accident. I love accidents and I believe in accidents. And that changed the course of history and it changed my life. And my parents, who thought they would never be able to visit China, suddenly were able to. And my mother worked at the United Nations. She was accused of being a spy. So it was a very complex, very fraught situation. I know nothing. I'm 15 years old and I meet dozens and dozens of relatives for the first time. And more than anything, I just got incredibly curious. And I said, I have to know this country better. I studied Chinese studies in college. Then I went to live there, not having a clue about where this would lead in my future. It was pure curiosity, lived there for a year and a half. But it was while I was there that for the very, very first time, I saw movies and television shows with people that looked like me.
Wow.
And it was so shocking and so radical. It was such a radical experience. And I was like, wait. And it just blew open my perspective on what was possible for my life, because I was like the spacey, artsy person in my family. I wasn't going to be a doctor. I wasn't going to be a lawyer. So what does that leave me? Not much. And so after studying Chinese and then going to live in China, I finally had not a career, but a mission. I was like, I want other people to see these Chinese films because I thought they were pretty good. Yeah. But also I liked what it did for me. And I thought it would do the same for others. It would just open up a lot of images and characterizations and perceptions of who this whole race could be. So I started organizing these Chinese film screenings, and I met so many people back then who went on to be comrades in the film industry. I went to business school because I still didn't know what I was going to do with my life, but I was organizing screenings. And then at the end of when I got that piece of paper that was helpful, this company in I used to go pick up these 35 millimeter prints from the New York consulate on 12th Avenue and 42nd Street. That's where the Chinese consulate was.
You just picked up the canisters.
Literally, I would go. They were like, "Yes, you can borrow these," and they were all 35 millimeter prints. So you know how heavy those are, right?
Oh yeah.
And I'd be carrying these prints, walking, because back then I only took the subway. I couldn't afford,
Yeah.
So carrying these giant prints, walking down 42nd Street to the subway and then going wherever. It was a funny, I look back on those days very fondly. And so people would come to, I managed to meet some people. I don't know how I did it, through organizations. I got people to go. So then at the end of once I got my business degree, there was a company in San Francisco that I kept bumping into because I would go can I borrow this film? And they said, oh yeah. And then I would find out another company in San Francisco, other individuals in San Francisco were also doing the same. And then they said, oh, by the way, and then we somehow connect. They said, we have a theater in San Francisco that we're renovating and we are interested in showing more Chinese films. So then they hired me. It was literally a 1 in a million chance of getting a job that I was interested in. There existed no other job for me except this one. Literally none. I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. And so we became a distributor of Chinese. I was flying back and forth to China. I was meeting with filmmakers and film executives. I was picking films that I thought would play well. Took filmmakers to film festivals, executives to film festivals, was promoting, was doing my own little funny thing and just having the time of my life. I was like, getting good reviews from critics and whatnot. Then I'm in a little basement office in San Francisco that I'm sharing with Wang, by the way, who at that point is a somewhat known filmmaker who made China's Missing and, who's starting to develop his career. So we were like own funny people, Asians in the industry. And then I get a call one day from someone who said, "Hi, I'm calling from MCA Universal." And he could hear the dead silence. I was like, and he's like, "It's not a phone company." Because if you remember, there was MCI.
Yes. Yeah. MCI.
And what is he saying? Universal. I never, I had no idea. He said, and he was laughing. He's like, "Yes, we own Universal Studios." I'm like, oh, that Universal. Okay.
Oh my God.
I read about you, he says to me, "I read about you in the San Francisco newspaper, and I'd like to meet with you." And it turns out he was someone that had been hired by Wasserman and Scheinberg, Lou Wasserman and Sid Scheinberg, for those who don't know, to start his own division at MCA Universal. He actually was based in the Bay Area and just moving to LA, so he saw the San Francisco paper. He came to visit me in the basement office, and he walked in and he was smiling because we talk about that fateful moment now. He's like, "Yeah, we had desks made of old doors, like on cinder blocks. It was pretty, pretty
down and dirty."
And he said, "Yeah, I'm very interested. I read about you, what you're doing here in San Francisco, because we had a big theater opening, a grand opening of the theater, and we invited this delegation from China and movie stars. And, the one Asian American actor that existed practically at the time, James Hong, he was there. We laugh about that now." They were just like seeds being planted, like who knew? Anyway.
Yes.
So one thing leads to another, and I end up going to work for this man named Skip Paul, who to this day is one of my favorite people in the world.
Oh, wow.
This big boost. I was suddenly in the Black Tower at Universal Studios. And at first we take trips to China. And then he's like, "I'm busy with all these other major deals," because he was doing big ones at the time. But, and then I started traveling back and forth, continuing to go back and forth China. But this time going through the Universal, Paramount, MGM, UA libraries to pick films that would be good for China. And that was fun. And I got to take Gregory Peck over with a retrospective of his work.
To show in China?
Yes. And one of the films, I basically sold the first 4 studio films. One was Roman Holiday, which is today one of the most beloved movies in China. It was
my God.
Spartacus, love story in the heat of the night. Anyway, we were picking through all the libraries, and I had to find things that I thought would be appropriate and welcomed in China. Not
right.
To it would not be Star Wars or Back to the Future. Those would have been so difficult for them to understand since they hadn't seen it in a long time. So that was that period of my life. And I'm in my office at Universal Studios. And one day when I get a call from Kathy Kennedy's office, and she said, "Oh, we hear you go back and forth to China. We're interested in making a movie in China." And I'm like, "Oh my God." So they send a little golf cart over because, they have their offices at Universal. I think that Newmark still is, they call them the Taco Bell offices.
Yeah. Because they look like a Pueblo. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. Pueblo style with fully stocked refrigerator. Anyway, that was when I got to see how well-funded producers live versus the offices at the Black Tower. Of course, I had prints of hunting,
Right.
It was very masculine.
Yeah.
So she tells me about this movie they want to make called Empire of the Sun. One thing leads to another, and they say, "Oh, but this is a Warner Brothers movie." And I'm like, "Can I work? I'm working, employed by Universal." But when you're Steven Spielberg and you're very good friends with Steve Ross at the time, and
things can happen.
Steinberg, somehow it got all worked out. I was just going to be on loan, and bless him, Skip Paul was very supportive. He's like, I was like, "Skip, what should I do?" He's like, "No, you absolutely should do it." So he's always been supportive in that way.
Yeah.
One thing leads to another. I'm suddenly on this movie. We have this giant, giant shoot in China where basically we have to close down the city. I'm there for 6 or 9 months during pre-production, basically getting permits, helping things get organized. I was just liaison with the production managers and the various people in China who we're going to bring over, who we're not going to bring over, how we're going to close everything off. And back in the day, things were very centralized. So once we got permission from the top, everything trickled down. We ended up having the pre-production was really long. The shoot was only about 3 weeks. We had at least 5,000 extras. Stephen remembers 10,000, whatever, somewhere between 5 and 10. So, we had this great shoot. And incidentally, Shanghai was still pretty, what's the right word? There wasn't a lot of entertainment. So we spent a lot of quality time together, because there weren't any distractions. Would be very different was in LA. And at the end of the experience, which was a good one for everyone, Kathy said, "Oh, would you like to be our production executive working on the Amblin account?" And I thought, wow, that's a great opportunity. So it would be like a major shift. She was just, Amblin up to that point had been mostly projects that Stephen directed, and she wanted to do development, and she felt like she needed, a kind of liaison at the studio. And so I was moved from Skip Paul's division to the production division. And I was now an executive at Universal. So I'm finally leading up to this. And I'm sorry,
No, I love it. I like lap up every one of these stories.
So, how'd your mom react when you told her about the wedding?
It never came up.
How come?
She'd rather get rectal cancer.
Losing him does not matter. It is you who will be found and cherished.
Okay, so then Kathy said, let's go to New York. I want to meet with publishers because I want to see what books are coming out. So I go with her to New York, and we're meeting at Putnam Publishers, and, they're introducing various books. And then, they're mostly talking to Kathy. I remember this so distinctly. And then they suddenly pivoted to me, and they're like, "Oh, by the way," I think it was the editor, Phyllis Graham. "By the way, we just acquired another novel. We never paid so much for a first-time novelist, and we don't even have the whole novel. We have 3 discrete chapters that aren't even interconnected. But here are the pages. Why don't you read them?" So I get 3 chapters of what became the Joy Luck Club, and I'm reading them on the plane ride from New York back to LA. And I am torn apart. Like, I'm reading it, crying. I'm like, wait. It was actually, in the past, I've talked about, like, it was almost a scary experience because I had many of us who come from immigrant cultures feel like we live this dual existence. We have a public-facing one and our private one.
Yes.
And there the twain shall meet. But as I was reading this, I felt like I was going to be exposed. I was like, oh my God, it was so familiar, so intimate. It was so pointed about an experience that I hadn't really shared. And they said, "Oh, if you like it, here's Amy Tan's contact. Why don't you call her?" I'm like, okay. So I do that. I talk to Amy. I go to San Francisco. I meet up with her. She starts sending me chapters as she's writing them. And I'm like, wow. So I'm reading these chapters.
So right away, you obviously connect.
Totally connect. And I have to say, bless Amy, because I think if it weren't for that early, I'm sure when she was starting out, she probably was feeling, it was her first novel. She was writing technical manuals before. So she probably appreciated the feedback and the support. And, it was just very easy to knew it was going to blow up like that. And I just said, I don't know what I'm doing yet, Amy, but I will do anything I can to help make this. And, I first took it to Amblin because that's where I was an executive. And they said, even though they weren't there, they're like, well, we just did Empire of the Sun, things set in China. It was so rare for anyone
right
even think this was possible. And I took it around and nobody had interest. And then a couple of years later, I joined Oliver Stone, where we had our funding, and I happened.
Oh,
Oliver there's this great book and I really want to develop it. And he's like, Joy? And then he goes home that night and it turns out his wife is reading it and loves it. Because by then, the book has come out, it's become a sensation. And so now a lot of people are talking about it. And he said, yeah, she loves it. Go for it. And bless Oliver too, because he did give me that kind of support. He said, go for it. And then we tried to make a deal with Carol Go, which was the studio that we had a deal with at the time. And it just took a really, really long time. And I kept checking with Amy what's happening. She said, oh, I met this director, Wang, who really wants to do it. I was like,
oh my God, what are the odds?
And then it turns out Ron Bass wanted to be, and one thing I said to Amy right off the bat was like, you have to be involved in the writing because this is your voice. It's like the stories, they resonate only because the way you're telling them. Like, I don't think it would work to have somebody else write the script because it's your voice. Anyway, she's like, I don't know how to write a script. It's like, don't worry, we can guide you, but you have to be involved. So anyway, that was months and months. And I think when Ron came on, she had the confidence, like, okay, I have somebody who's walking me through.
I mean, Ron was one of the most significant writers of the time. How did he come?
Yes, I can't remember. I don't remember how he connected somehow, maybe through agents and somebody told somebody to. That was not my doing. That was completely with Amy. And we were trying to make a deal. Like, she came to me and said, how about I co-write with Ron, and Wayne's the director. I was like, fantastic. So we were trying to make a deal with Carol Go. Little did we realize, and like almost a year goes by and like they're still trying to make a deal. Little did I realize that Carol Go was starting to dissolve. We had our deal there. So they came back and they said, Wayne, Ron, and I have time now to write it. And we just like to write it on spec. I'm like, oh my God, that's incredible. So they said, we it's so rare for us to have this window. We're just going to write it, which they did. And also bless them, because at that point I had no rights. Like, I didn't have to involve, we didn't have anything in writing, but they did come back to us, and I guess they thought that we would be an additive. So they came with this script. I remember I was on a plane again. I was reading. I'm always crying on planes, it seems. So I'm reading the script.
As we all are. Yeah, totally.
And I'm sobbing again. I'm like, oh my God, this is so incredible. And it was literally very close to the movie that we made. This is maybe twice in my life where you get the script. That's the movie. You're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So then our next job is to sell it. We have this script, so we go around and back then, you may know this, there was only 5 or 6 major players. Like, you go to one of them. So we did our rounds with the studios, pass, and then with some attendant remarks like, oh, could you make some of the characters white? Or
sure, of course.
Where's the rule for the movie star? The typical thing. Because it was, you can't fault anybody if you're going by what has been successful in the past. Mm-hmm. And that's why, in my mind, algorithms don't work. But then, you don't make a movie like this. Why would you? But Jeffrey Katzenberg had the foresight. He knew it was a best-selling book, for starters. I think he's always been a little more cued into the Asian diaspora. Mm-hmm. You look at a lot of the movies that he supported, like Mulan and Kung Fu Panda and various other things. He always saw how there was an audience, and he just said, fine, let's do it. Wow. And he gave us, a decent budget, 10 and a half or so. Yeah. But that's, a movie that a studio today would never make. Yeah. Back studios took chances. They just found projects that had individual merit. They weren't based on whatever. So we made the movie.
Talk to me a little bit about the casting.
The casting was fascinating.
Because it wasn't like you were forced to hire any stars, right? Like, that was not the mandate. It was like, we're making this for a budget of 10, and like,
couldn't hire stars. There were no stars.
Yes.
There were 0 stars. So it was obvious from the word go, there would be 0 stars. We got a couple of names here and there. So anyway, 0 stars. We just started casting, so we're casting mothers and daughters. So we're seeing virtually everybody. And this is the thing I've heard Wayne says, and I would agree, is like, we could have cast 10 Joy Luck clubs. I mean, there were so many. Wow. If you're not for a star and you just look at good actors, because people are like, where did you find those actors? That's amazing. That's amazing. I'm like, and I'm here to remind people the actors exist. If you want star power, that's where it gets very narrow. If you just want good actors, I've found this in everything I've done. The actors, a ton of great actors. I don't mean to, diminish anybody, but there are great actors. So we ended up choosing who we did a lot. There was a lot of back and forth, and then also pairing the mothers and daughters and personalities, and it was super fun. I mean, we were casting I had this office with Oliver in Santa Monica, and we do all the casting sessions there, and it was just my God, so much. It was actually one of the most fun things, because there was such excitement, when we're meeting the actors. They'd like never ever been offered a role like this, and they just they're beside themselves.
Janet, talk a little bit about Wayne's process, because like one of the things I love to talk about with producers is like their observations about the great filmmakers, right? Like everyone has their own bag of tricks. What did you remember or particularly note about Wayne?
What I remember is that he's a very gentle soul. My experience and memory of this is like, and to this day, when I get together with the gals, we're on a group chat, the Joy Luck gals.
Oh, fun.
So much excitement, enthusiasm, laughter, screaming, joy. There really is just a lot of, and like support. The last time we were together was at Ming Na's Hollywood Walk of Fame handprint ceremony.
Oh, wow.
So, but we have, periodically we get together to do this. There was a screening of Joy Luck at the Academy a few years ago. There's screenings, sometimes they do tributes, because we just had this year's the 30th, but we had a 25th, a lot of stuff around 20. So whenever there's the opportunity to get together, and we're constantly laughing about how, and it was mostly them, like I'm the more low-key one compared, they were like, yes, we kept getting shushed on planes, and like, there's just a lot of excitement. Mm-hmm. And then, sometimes with the mothers, it's like even more exciting. There's just a lot of, and Wayne was so good. He's the opposite of a control freak. I think he knows what he wants, but he certainly could absorb all this energy around him very well. Not a loud, boisterous director at all, but very effective one in his quiet way. And it just worked as something, sometimes it just works out.
It's so funny, because I did study it in high school, and it's very rare to study both the book and the film, right? And what I particularly remember is that the visual metaphors almost exactly matched Amy's writing. Like there's this one scene where the mother is in a bedroom and there's blinds. You remember that scene where the sun is showing through the blinds? And we talked about that extensively, about it, like a tiger changing its stripes. Like she is who she is. And that is the metaphor that he was able to like execute so beautifully. And I think like there's so much of that in the film where it feels like the writer and the filmmaker were really married in their vision. And you don't always get that, right? It's like you take the novel and you sort of put it aside and you make your own thing. But it felt like such a synergy of literature and visuals.
Well, that's I think that's the direct result of Amy being closely involved.
Yes. Yeah.
She gave us a lot of great imagery in the book, I think the way that Wayne, when I watched it again on the big screen, I had forgotten how big some of the scenes were, like massive and done for that budget, shooting in China in part. It was funny at one of the screenings, when they asked, some of your favorite or least favorite scenes, one person shot his hand up and said, I love the movie, but the fake green screen of the mountains, and it was actually shot in Guilin, but that person thought it was
right. It was all fake.
We're like, oh my God.
We didn't do that back in the day. You couldn't do that for $10 million. Those are real.
I ate opium. And I died. For my daughter's sake. Now get out of my house.
So there was just, I mean, for me personally, it was incredibly meaningful. I think my parents never really understood what I did. I think for a moment when I worked for MCA Universal, they're like, okay, 17,000 employees and we get it. Then I went to join Oliver and they were like, what? Then I couldn't exactly boast about the films he was making. Like The Doors was the first one. I was like, no, don't see that one. On the Joy Luck Club, they were extras in the movie.
Oh, were they? Where were they placed?
In that big party scene when they're watching TV, it's like in the beginning, and
Yeah.
the send-off party. And you see my mother and father like cheering or
My God.
doing whatever. And another day, my mother came just because they lived in the Bay Area. So it was just this weird confluence. I was like, oh my God, my personal life, my professional life, my friends, my family,
Oh God.
It was like almost too much.
Yeah,
you know?
I find those days actually very stressful. When you decide to bring your family into your work life, I find them so overwhelming.
Another day that my mother came to set was the day when Tamlin Tomita's Tai Chi are shooting in the beauty parlor and looking in the mirror. And I'm looking, my mother and I are facing them, also seeing their reflection in the mirror. It was all like
the metaphor is
so
too great.
Meta.
Totally.
It was pretty meta. It was meta. There were so many things. Suddenly they had something to brag about. Like, I think all these years Asian parents are so they dwell on their children too much. They brag or put them down, whatever.
Right.
This is something they can.
They could really take to the bank.
Brag about, and then all their friends are so excited about it. But I do have to say, yes, the Asian American community discovered this movie, but it's not like we ever marketed to them because nobody thought of it as a subgroup to be marketed. And the reason I bring that up because it's a market change from what's going on today, where people recognize that there are specific communities that can really, help get the word out. And it's often the most, passionate. I love what A24 has done, and I teach. And one of the people I bring into my class every semester, who's one of the most popular speakers, is from A24, and he's done a lot of marketing. About like the movie Minari, for instance, Minari, and how he said we went to Korean churches, we went to community groups, we started with a very, very, very specific group, and we built it out from there. So word of mouth was, of course, that this makes sense. They don't blast it wide. They use social media. They don't spend a ton of money. They just work from the bottom up. And that's not something that ever happened back in the day, certainly not with a company like Disney.
There was no playbook for them. I'm sure they had no idea. They'd never tried to target that kind of audience before.
And I do have to say, I don't mind sharing, just to point out the difference. Again, no shade on anybody, but one of the few times I saw Wayne lose his tempers, we were in a marketing meeting and they started pulling out the potential one sheets. And they'd say, how about this? How about this? None of them had a photographic image of an Asian face. There were woodcuts. There were people from behind. They were doing everything they could
to hide it.
They thought it was going to be a turnoff, I think. We vehemently objected, and I think Wayne stormed out of the meeting.
Wow.
Because it was so, they were so supportive of the film. And I don't blame anybody. Those were the times. But it was shocking. You know? It again, so much has changed then and now. So,
but if I recall, the one sheep ended up being the mothers and daughters, right?
So we did have it was primarily the Ming-Na Wen character and hugging a woman. And so, yes, they finally came around because we objected.
But like, that's just what breaking barriers is, right? It's like what you're doing every day. It's what we're trying to do every day is just like push the boundary of what's marketable, what's acceptable.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, we knew we had something when we started testing the movie.
Yeah.
People were coming out like weeping. It was really incredible, actually, to go to those first test screenings going, oh my God, this is somehow resonating. This little movie that we had no idea would ever really see the light of day. How do you market a movie when there's no stars? Back then, people were so dependent on stars.
Yes.
But somehow, just word of mouth, the critics were, I don't know if we talked about another movie I made. I think these are the two that have the most critical, the best critical response. But it was breaking so many barriers,
Yeah.
people at the time did not like reading subtitles. It was like considered a big no-no. I mean,
Right.
don't know what Jeffrey was thinking. He just had an instinct. Like subtitles were a no-no. People, another no-no was flashbacks. Big no-no of like no stars and no white people.
Right. Maybe one.
How did this happen?
Yeah.
And also like so much back and forth in the narrative. Could you keep, 3 generations in some cases? Like, how do you keep track of that? So every now and then one slips through, and I never stop relishing when people come up to me and say, "Oh, this movie changed my life."
Yeah.
I never, to me, that's a reminder of why we do what we do. This was one. I love that it stood the test of time.
It really has. I mean, Janet, let me ask you, because the movie did well. The movie did well at the box office, and a lot of times we'll examine movies like I did The Ice Storm with Ted Hope, and and I did Election with Albert and Ron, and those are movies that really didn't perform, right? Those are movies that really like made sub $10 million, and then like after the fact, they continued to grow their legacy, and they've become these films that people really look to. And your movie did perform, but I am curious if it continued to grow exponentially after it came out.
That's something we'll never know, because I even asked, because my deal was tied to Oliver. I don't mind sharing it. I just asked the Blue about, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I was like, because the actors are still seeing residuals.
Right. Great. Which not happening today.
I was like, I never saw a cent. I wonder what's going on. And I happened to get in touch with Oliver's accountant, because it would have gone through his thing, because I was part of Ixlin, our company at the time. And he showed me a letter that was sent to him just within years of the movie coming out. So we're now talking, I can't remember the exact date, saying, "Oh, by the way, based on our accounting, we believe this movie will remain forever in the red, so you're not going to see anything."
I find that hard to believe.
Well,
yeah, studio accounting.
This is a very hot topic in our industry right now.
Sure is. Yep.
I have never once seen a penny from anything. I don't. I think producers in general, we don't have a guild that is able to track residuals and whatever back end. So I don't really, I don't know what to say about that, except I believe for some people it's still making. I have to believe that it's been, it does seem to live on TV. It seems TV quite a bit. So somewhere people are still watching it, and it's just one of those things.
Well, I mean, that's an entirely different topic that we'd have to do another exploration of, exactly. Which I'm no, but it is something, our fan base is like a lot of people who obviously are like in our industry, but a lot who just love great stories about how great things got made. And so this is a time that I think even for me, who's deeply, deeply involved in the business and the business of residuals and participation as an independent producer, I don't fully understand the nuts and bolts of how accounting gets done through the studios. So
I know it's so funny, because people have their complaints about studios now. What's even perhaps more objectionable is when they don't even share the data. At least with theatrical films, like people like to brag, "Oh, it made this much at the box office." So you have some idea, you have some idea what it's doing. There may be a lot of other things that prevent you from seeing proper back end, but with the streamers, you don't even know at all.
Yeah.
You don't have a handle on that at all. So
no, that has to change. I mean, don't you feel like it's like the system has to just totally break down?
I have to be very careful.
Yes, of course.
Because
you represent a very large body.
And we are not allowed to speak. We're not allowed to engage in any disputes or whatever. But it's just a fact that I think we all know, is that the streamers don't share,
Yes.
So it's a very different system right now that we're contending with than we did back in the day.
Yes. Well, Janet, I'm so impressed with all the work that you were doing for the Academy. You just you were so well-spoken and just absolutely luminous at the Academy Awards. And I'm just so happy and honored that you are our representative. And so continue to like fight for what's right. I can see great change happening under your watch. And thank you so much for telling this story, because this movie really is like so impactful and wonderful.
For asking about it. It truly is something I talk about. It's the gift that keeps on giving, because it has brought joy and has brought luck to all of us who've been involved, and every now and then one just, manages to get to that place.
It's like why we keep doing it, right? Because you're like, well, that one really did.
Exactly.
Exactly. They make a change.
Just happen again.
Well, you're the best, Janet. I hope to see you very soon.
Thank you.
All right, my dear. Thank you so much for doing this. I'll speak to you soon.
Bye-bye.
You have style. No one can teach. Must be born this way. I see you.
I'd finally done something for her. I'd found the best of myself, what she kept for all of us, her long-cherished wish.
So, Janet Yang, what a class act.
Yeah, and a force. Like
Force
a lovely,
of nature.
kind person.
Just so bright, so sharp. We were talking just before just about how she really wasn't clear on her career trajectory, but she was clearly just so competent and smart and capable that she sort of ping-ponged her way up into just like some extraordinary situations. And I love
so many boundaries because of that.
Yes. And I love the like being asked to come on to Empire of the Sun and just like navigate that. That must have been really, really difficult. I can't imagine.
For that to be essentially the first movie that she worked on, because before that she had been bringing other movies to Chinese audiences, which in and of itself is an incredible task and an incredible feat that she opened up that world to a whole new country, people who hadn't been exposed.
I mean, I love the idea of bringing Roman Holiday to the Chinese market. It's just like so amazing, and she chose it. It's so cool.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
But then to be handpicked to go work on Empire of the Sun with Steven Spielberg as really the first movie you ever work on.
Right.
I mean, what an experience.
Yeah.
And what a way to learn how to make a movie. And from those people, I mean, that Empire of the Sun is also that is such a formative movie for me. And it's a beautiful film.
Yeah, that's one we should put on the pod, don't you think?
Yeah.
It's a great one.
Let's get Steve on here.
Did I ever tell you my Christian Bale story?
I don't think so.
My stepdad was in the UK, in England, making a movie called King Ralph. And I was 13 years old, and we went over to like live in London for the month during the summer. And he was like, oh, we just got invited to a royal premiere, which was like a royal premiere was like when one of the royals would show up. And it's going to be Back to the Future 3. And so Princess Diana attended. I went to Laura Ashley and got a dress. And it was like totally unexpected. It was like, you guys got to get ready. It's black tie. You got to like totally get dressed up. So me, my sister, and my stepbrother go to this royal premiere. We see Princess Di, and we go to the after party. And my stepdad at the time was kind of like in the Hollywood mix. He had just made Major League, and like now he's making King Ralph with John Goodman. And so we're kind of like hanging around Spielberg because everyone's hanging around Spielberg, and like you got to go kiss the ring and blah, blah, blah. And so Spielberg turns to my dad. He's like, oh, yeah, King Ralph. It's going to be the next twins. And we were like, what? Like it bore no relevance to twins, but like that was the word in Hollywood in the early 90s. And meanwhile, I've got my eye on Christian Bale, who at the time, he had already made Empire of the Sun. It was probably 3 years post Empire of the Sun.
Was it like Newsies Christian Bale?
Yes, like Newsies Christian Bale.
Beautiful.
And I totally knew who he was and had like a huge crush, right? Like I was 13, he was probably like 15. And he's like waiting to talk to Spielberg. Like he's sort of standing in the wings, and Spielberg like does not recognize him. And so he keeps trying to like edge in, and Spielberg's just like ignoring this kid. And finally he goes, Steven, it's Christian. And he goes, "Oh my God, Christian, you're 2 feet taller than you were when we made the movie." And it was like, I saw this moment. If I ever meet Christian Bale, I'm going to tell him I witnessed the moment that Spielberg did not recognize the star of Empire of the Sun. Anyways.
Maybe he listens to our podcast.
Yeah.
Christian. Remember that?
Or Steven.
Or Steven.
So anyways, yeah, Empire of the Sun, like such a great, great movie. But I also love the fact that Janet met Amy before the novel was finished and just developed this relationship with her where she trusted her. Amy was sending Janet chapters as she was writing it. Like, I really think that's like the tell of a great producer too, where you become the trusted confidant of the creatives, right? Whether that's the writer or the novelist or the filmmaker or whatever, you're the person that they can come to, that they can show things to, and like, you know, is this working or is this not working? Like the idea that Janet was sort of involved in the actual development of the novel that became so great is also kind of incredible, you know?
That's such a pivotal relationship, the producer-writer relationship, because you guys are in it for far longer than a producer and director are in it. And it's key for both, for the writer to feel like their voice is really being heard and that you can trust this person to make sure your vision gets on screen, and for the producer to trust that writer to, you know, make the script in a way that's makeable as a movie. That's right. So the fact that she did that with Amy and had that relationship that probably impacted the rest of her career and the way that she interacted with writers every other movie.
I actually remember observing Janet just like as an intern. I would sort of, you know, like you would sort of quietly, you know, it's like our interns, they kind of listen to like what conversations are happening. And I just remember Janet speaking to talent or speaking to Oliver Stone or whatever. And she just had this quiet calm that was like firm, but also warm. And so I feel like she could talk people through trauma. And that is another quality of like a producer that I always like think about, you know, like your job is just to like maintain calm, get through. There's so much drama and trauma in this business for whatever reason. And she just always had that ability. So anyways, hats off to Janet Yang.
Yeah.
Thank you for telling us that story.
Pretty incredible. And this was just the start of an incredible producing career. And like you said, she's president of the Academy. So she's navigating the Academy in a very tricky time in our business. So I don't envy her, but I'm so glad she's there, you know?
Yeah. All right, guys. That's another good one.
Please continue to listen, like and subscribe. Keep sending us reviews. Keep sending us messages. DM us on Instagram at Stay Gold Features. Let us know if there are any films that you want us to highlight or any producers you want us to talk to. Yeah, just we're here.
All right, guys. Don't forget, stay gold.
Stay gold.